It had been an ordinary Friday morning when Jennifer packed her bags, her heart heavy with an anxious anticipation she didn't quite understand. She'd been planning this weekend for weeks, or at least that's what she had told her husband, Mark. She claimed it was for some me time, a rare weekend getaway to clear her mind. Mark had smiled, kissed her on the cheek, and sent her off without a second thought, blissfully unaware of the storm she was about to brew. As she slipped into the rental car with David, her lover, the weight of her actions sank in. The car hummed quietly as they drove towards the secluded cabin nestled in the woods by a tranquil lake. David kept talking about how perfect everything would be, how she deserved a break from everything, from her boring marriage, from her predictable life. His words were soothing, almost hypnotic, and Jennifer allowed herself to be swept into his fantasy. The truth, however, was more complicated than that. The truth was that Jennifer had been searching for something she couldn't name for a long time. It was a void that her marriage to Mark, despite all the love and respect, just couldn't fill. Mark had become comfortable, predictable, and that's when David had entered her life. A few stolen moments, a few innocent glances at first, and then the passion. David made her feel alive in a way Mark had stopped doing years ago. But now, as they drove towards the cabin, a knot of guilt twisted in Jennifer's stomach. She didn't want to think about Mark, didn't want to imagine how he would react if he knew where she was. But somewhere deep down, Jennifer knew that this weekend would change everything. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the choices she was making, the lies she was telling, and the truth that was always lingering in the background, waiting to be exposed. They reached the cabin just as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the serene landscape. The lake shimmered beneath the fading light, and Jennifer could hear the gentle lapping of water against the shore. It was beautiful, peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. David quickly unloaded the car, eager to make their escape from the world. Jennifer followed him, her mind racing. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. Soft lights illuminated the space, and the scent of pine and fresh air filled the room. The large windows offered a breathtaking view of the lake, and for a moment, Jennifer allowed herself to relax. David was already opening a bottle of wine, his movements smooth and confident, as if he was fully in control of the situation. Jennifer sat on the couch, her eyes glued to the fire crackling in the stone fireplace. The reality of what she was doing finally hit her with full force. She had betrayed Mark, the man who had given her everything, his love, his trust, his future. And now, here she was in a cabin with David, pretending that this was normal, pretending that everything would be fine. David approached her, offering her a glass of wine. He smiled, his eyes locking with hers. But Jennifer couldn't bring herself to smile back. She took the glass, but the sweetness of the wine couldn't mask the bitter taste of her conscience. As the night wore on, they talked, laughed, and slowly began to unwind. But the tension between them was palpable. Jennifer was acutely aware of how fragile this moment was, how close they were to crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. She tried to silence the voice in her head, the voice that was telling her she was making a mistake. But she couldn't. She had already made the choice. The fire burned low, and soon the two of them were left in near darkness, save for the soft glow of the embers. Jennifer's mind was racing, and her heart ached with a mix of excitement and dread. She had always known this weekend would be unforgettable, but she never imagined it would come at such a cost. The next morning, Jennifer woke up with a start, her eyes wide open as she realized the weight of what she had done. The soft rustling of the wind outside the cabin and the distant call of birds did nothing to soothe the storm inside her. Beside her, David was still asleep, his arm casually draped over her waist. He looked peaceful, content, as if nothing in the world could disrupt this moment. But Jennifer knew better. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand and her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. Mark's name flashed on the screen, a message. She couldn't bring herself to open it, but her curiosity won. Slowly, she swiped the screen. "Good morning, love. Hope you're having a nice, relaxing time. Can't wait to hear all about it when you get back. Miss you." Her chest tightened. The sincerity in Mark's words struck her harder than anything else. He trusted her. He loved her. And here she was, lying in a bed with another man, hiding the truth from him. She quickly locked the phone, shoving it back on the nightstand as if it might explode. David stirred beside her, his hand gently running over her arm. "Morning," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. Jennifer managed to smile, but it felt strained, forced. "Morning," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. David sat up, stretching. "Let's get some breakfast," he said, clearly excited. "I made plans for us today. There's a spot by the lake, perfect for hiking. We'll have the whole day to ourselves." Jennifer nodded absent-mindedly, her mind elsewhere. She couldn't shake the gnawing guilt that gnawed at her. This wasn't just an affair. It was a lie. A betrayal. She had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. But as she looked at David, she couldn't help but feel a flutter in her chest. He was charming, spontaneous, and everything her life with Mark was not. They ate breakfast in silence, the weight of the unspoken tension thick between them. Afterward, David insisted on going hiking, urging Jennifer to forget about everything else, to focus on the beauty of the moment. She agreed, mostly to escape the turmoil inside her. The hike was long, winding through dense woods and across rocky terrain. Jennifer was silent most of the time, lost in her thoughts. Every time she glanced at David, she saw him as the man she wanted, the man who made her feel alive. But in the back of her mind, Mark's face lingered, his gentle smile, his soft eyes, his unwavering trust in her. How could she live with herself knowing what she was doing? As they reached a clearing by the lake, David stopped, turning to her with a playful grin. "This is perfect," he said. "Just you and me. No distractions, no worries." Jennifer forced a smile. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water, but her heart was in turmoil. She felt like she was caught between two worlds, the life she had with Mark and the thrilling but reckless escape she was living with David. Then, in a moment of vulnerability, she spoke. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, David. I don't know if I can keep lying." David's expression softened, and for a moment he looked almost serious. "Jennifer," he said, his voice low and steady, "you're not lying to me. You're not doing anything wrong. You deserve this. You deserve to feel alive." Her eyes welled up with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "I don't know if I do. I don't know if I'm even the person I used to be anymore." David stepped closer, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "You're the same person, Jennifer. You're just rediscovering who you are. We all need that sometimes." But Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Deep down, she knew that this weekend, this fleeting escape from reality, was about to shatter everything she had built with Mark. She couldn't keep running from the truth. As they made their way back to the cabin, the weight of the situation settled deeper into Jennifer's soul. She had come here to escape, but instead, she was being forced to confront everything she had been trying to avoid. The truth was always waiting for her, lurking just below the surface, and soon it would all come crashing down. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in on Jennifer with every passing second. The flickering light from the fireplace cast long shadows, and the once peaceful retreat now felt suffocating. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as David moved around the room, packing up their things. He was whistling, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. Jennifer stood frozen at the window, watching the last light of the day slowly fade away. Her mind was a whirlwind of guilt, confusion, and fear. She had hoped this weekend would be a temporary escape, but now it was a reminder of how much she had been hiding. How long could she keep pretending? Then the phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with a simple message. "Mark." Her stomach twisted as she read his words. "I miss you, Jennifer. Can't wait to see you. Please be careful, okay? I love you." The weight of his love, his trust, crushed her. Tears welled up in her eyes. She had to tell him. She couldn't keep running from the truth, but before she could respond, she heard David's footsteps behind her. "Jen?" His voice was soft, almost too soft. "Is everything all right?" She turned to face him, her throat tight with emotion. "We need to talk." David's smile faltered, and he put down the bag he had been packing. He stepped toward her, his brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "You're acting strange." Jennifer swallowed hard. The words stuck in her throat. "I'm not the person you think I am, David." David's expression shifted, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I'm married," she said, the confession spilling out before she could stop it. "I came here with you knowing that. I've been lying to you, to Mark, to myself." The silence that followed was thick, unbearable. David didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there, his eyes locked on hers, searching for something. But all he found was the truth. Finally he spoke, his voice low, almost detached. "So this whole thing this weekend, it was all a lie?" "No," Jennifer said quickly, her hands trembling. "It wasn't a lie. I needed to feel alive, David. I needed to feel something other than the numbness I've been living with." David took a step back, running a hand through his hair. "You should have told me, Jen. You should have been honest with me from the start." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I'm so sorry." There was a long pause, then David let out a sigh, shaking his head. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to be used. I didn't want to be just some escape for you, Jennifer. I'm not your distraction." Her chest tightened as his words hit harder than she expected. "David, no. That's not what this was. It's not about you. It's about me. I've been running for my own life for so long that I lost sight of what really matters." David crossed his arms, his face hardening. "And Mark? What does he have to say about all of this?" Jennifer's heart twisted at the mention of Mark's name. She had been keeping him in the dark, but now the lies were impossible to hide. "I love him," she whispered, barely able to speak through the lump in her throat. "I love Mark, but I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what to do anymore." David stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he turned toward the door. "Maybe you should go back to him then," he said, his voice sharp. "Maybe you should figure things out with the person you really love." Jennifer opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She wanted to explain, to beg him to understand, but she knew it was too late. The damage was done. There was no going back. David paused at the door, his back to her. "You don't have to choose me, Jennifer. You don't have to choose anyone. But you have to choose yourself first. You have to decide what kind of person you want to be." With those final words, he walked out, leaving Jennifer standing alone in the dimly lit cabin, the weight of her choices crashing down on her like a tidal wave. Jennifer sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in her trembling hands. Mark's message still hung on the screen, his words innocent and filled with love. "I miss you, Jennifer. Can't wait to see you. Please be careful, okay? I love you." The weight of his love suffocated her as she thought about what she was about to do. She had made her choice. The lies, the secrets, they couldn't go on any longer. She had lied to David, lied to Mark, and most importantly, lied to herself. For so long she had convinced herself she could handle this, that she could juggle both worlds without consequence. But now, standing in the aftermath of everything, the truth was inescapable. Taking a deep breath, Jennifer dialed Mark's number. Her fingers shook as she pressed the call button, and it felt like an eternity before the line connected. She could hear his voice on the other end, cheerful, eager. "Hey, Jen, how's it going? Everything okay?" Mark's voice was warm, and for a moment Jennifer almost convinced herself she could go back to the life she had known, the life she had built with him. But she couldn't. Not anymore. "Mark, we need to talk," Jennifer said, her voice low, trembling. There was a pause on the other end. "What's wrong? You sound off." She closed her eyes, tears welling up, the words painful to say. "I can't keep doing this. I've been lying to you. To both of you. I'm not who you think I am." Another silence. Her heart pounded in her chest. Mark didn't say anything at first, as if trying to process the words that had just shattered his world. And then, his voice, barely above a whisper, came through the phone. "What do you mean? Jennifer, what's going on?" Jennifer swallowed hard. "I've been seeing someone else. While I've been with you, I've been with David." The words hung in the air like poison. There was a long silence, and Jennifer's stomach twisted in knots. She could feel the ache in her chest as the truth settled in. Mark wasn't going to understand. He wasn't going to forgive her. "Wait," Mark's voice trembled. "You've been with David all this time? While I thought we were happy?" Jennifer let out a shaky breath. "I thought I could handle it, Mark. I thought I could keep it together, but I can't anymore. I never meant for this to happen, but it did. And now, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this." Mark's voice broke, his pain evident even through the phone. "So, everything was a lie? The weekends together, the times we spent laughing, building a life, was that all a lie too?" Jennifer choked on a sob, her tears now flowing freely. "No, Mark, it wasn't a lie. I love you, I do. But I got lost somewhere along the way. I was looking for something more, and I'm so sorry." There was no reply at first, just the sound of Mark's breathing on the other end, as if he was processing everything. The silence was suffocating, and Jennifer's heart broke all over again with every passing second. "Tell me this isn't happening," Mark finally whispered. "Tell me you're not choosing him. Tell me you're not choosing a lie over everything we had." Jennifer closed her eyes, her heart shattering. "I can't choose, Mark. I don't know how to choose." And then it hit her, the full weight of what she had done. In trying to escape the pain of her own life, she had hurt the two people she loved most. She had deceived both of them, and now it was all unraveling. She had no way to undo the damage, no way to take back the trust she had broken. "Do you love him?" Mark's voice was barely audible now, as though he was already slipping away. Jennifer opened her mouth, but no words came out. She loved Mark, but she had also betrayed him. She had hurt him in a way that would never be fixable. The guilt ate away at her, leaving her hollow inside. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know anymore. Goodbye, Jennifer." The finality in his voice cut through her like a knife. Before she could say anything else, the line went dead. Jennifer dropped the phone onto the bed, her body trembling with a mixture of regret and disbelief. It was over. She had lost him, but she hadn't just lost Mark. She had lost herself. In chasing something she couldn't have, in running from the truth, she had destroyed everything. Her chest tightened as the full extent of her actions sank in. She had betrayed the man who loved her. She had betrayed herself. And now she was left with nothing. The days following Mark's departure blurred into an agonizing haze. Jennifer felt as if she were caught in an endless loop, unable to escape the consequences of her actions. Each morning she woke up to the reality of her mistakes, the emptiness of her own bed mocking her, reminding her of the man who once filled it with warmth and laughter. But now, all that was left was the deafening silence of her own guilt. She hadn't heard from Mark since their conversation, and she wasn't sure she ever would. His final words, the finality in his tone, haunted her. "Goodbye, Jennifer." That was it, the end. The one thing she feared the most had come to pass. She had lost him. And then there was David. Her mind often wandered back to him, the lover who had been nothing but patient with her lies, her deceit. He had waited too. He had believed in her. But how could she continue the relationship? How could she continue with someone who had been nothing but a second choice, a placeholder for what she really wanted? She had betrayed both men, and now she was left standing alone, unsure of what she really wanted. The cabin, that weekend getaway that had started it all. The memories that should have been filled with passion and excitement now felt like a cold reminder of the mess she had created. She had convinced herself that she could balance it all, that she could have the best of both worlds. But she had been wrong, so wrong. It was late on a Friday evening when Jennifer found herself standing at the door to David's apartment. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat reminding her of the heavy burden she carried. She hadn't told him about Mark, hadn't had the strength to admit the truth. But tonight, she knew she had to face him. The door opened before she could knock. David stood there, his face lighting up when he saw her, his arms instinctively reaching out. He always seemed to find comfort in her presence. But Jennifer wasn't sure she could find comfort in his anymore. "Jen, hey, you okay?" he asked, his voice warm and concerned. She could see the slight furrow in his brow, the worry that always seemed to linger when she was around. I need to talk to you," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. David's expression shifted. The concern deepened. "Come in, babe. What's going on?" She stepped inside, her hands shaking as she closed the door behind her. Her eyes wandered around his apartment, the small, cozy space that had always felt like a haven when she needed one. But now, it felt more like a prison. A place where she had built another layer of lies that she no longer knew how to escape from. Jennifer sank down onto the couch, her legs weak. David followed her, sitting beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. He squeezed it, offering her a reassurance she didn't deserve. "Talk to me," he urged, his voice gentle, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Jennifer took a deep breath, gathering the courage she needed. She had kept her secret from him long enough. She could no longer hide the truth, not from him, and not from herself. "I've been seeing someone else," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been lying to you. I've been lying to myself." David's hand stilled in hers, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean? Someone else? What are you talking about, Jen?" She squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the weight of the confession settle on her like a 1,000-pound anchor. "Mark," she whispered, barely able to look him in the eye. "I've been with Mark. I was with him while I was with you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Jennifer could feel David's shock radiating off of him. His hand dropped from hers, his face falling into an expression of disbelief. "Wait, what? Mark?" His voice cracked, and Jennifer could hear the hurt in it. The betrayal. "I didn't mean for it to happen, David," she said, her voice quivering. "I never wanted to hurt you. But I was so lost, so confused. I didn't know how to stop. And now, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this." David stood up abruptly, walking away from her as if trying to put space between them. Jennifer watched helplessly, her chest tightening with every step he took. This was it. This was the moment where everything unraveled. "Fix this?" David repeated bitterly. "How do you fix something like this, Jennifer? You lied to me. You lied to both of us. And now you expect me to just forgive you? Forget it?" Tears welled in Jennifer's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had to face the consequences of her actions. I know I can't fix it. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." David turned around, his eyes blazing with hurt and anger. "You should have never been with me in the first place if you were going to do this. I was a second choice, wasn't I? A distraction while you tried to figure out your real feelings. But what about me, Jennifer? What about what I wanted?" Jennifer opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The reality of what she had done settled over her like a wave, and she felt like she was drowning in it. She had hurt him. She had used him. And now there was nothing left to salvage. David shook his head, his voice cold and final. "I can't do this. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not." He walked towards the door, his back to her. "Goodbye, Jennifer." And with that, he left. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and regret. Jennifer sat in her empty apartment, staring at the four walls that once felt like a safe haven, now a cage that mirrored her internal turmoil. Mark was gone. David was gone. Both had walked out of her life, each for different reasons, yet the pain felt the same. Her phone was silent, too silent. No messages, no calls, not even a simple "how are you?" from anyone who had once been in her life. Mark's absence stung, but it was David's silence that cut deepest. She had broken him. She had betrayed his trust in a way she never thought possible. Jennifer's phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the silence. Her heart skipped a beat, but when she saw the name on the screen, she felt her stomach sink. It was from Mark. The message was simple. "We need to talk." Her hands shook as she tapped on the message, not sure if she was ready to face the man she had hurt so deeply. She thought of the lies, the deceit, and the way she had torn apart everything they once had. She had no right to ask him for anything, yet here he was, reaching out again. She stood up, pacing across the room. What did he want? What more could he possibly need to say? Did he want to scream at her? To tell her how much she had ruined everything? Or was he trying to piece together something that couldn't be fixed? The message stayed on her screen, blinking at her like a beacon of everything she had destroyed. Then the phone buzzed again. Another message from Mark, this time more direct. "I'm at the park. We need to talk in person." Jennifer's chest tightened. Her instinct screamed at her to refuse, to leave things as they were, but she knew deep down that was not an option. She couldn't just let Mark walk away without offering him some semblance of closure, even if she didn't deserve it. She grabbed her coat and stepped out the door, the cold air of the evening biting at her skin as she made her way to the park. Her steps felt heavier with each passing moment, the weight of the last few days pressing down on her like a storm she couldn't outrun. When she reached the park, she saw him. Mark was sitting on a bench near the fountain, his posture stiff, his face unreadable. He was exactly how she remembered him, though there was an unfamiliar distance in his eyes that sent a chill through her. Jennifer hesitated before approaching him. She had no idea what to expect. She had no idea what he would say or whether she could bear to hear it. "Mark," she said softly, her voice trembling. He looked up at her, but his expression didn't change. "Jennifer," he replied, his voice flat. There was a long pause as they both stood there, unsure of what to say next. Jennifer had been rehearsing an apology in her head for days, but now, in front of him, the words felt hollow. Nothing could undo the damage she had done. I don't know where to begin," she said, stepping closer to him. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you." Mark's eyes flickered with something between anger and sorrow, but he didn't speak. Jennifer could feel her heart racing in her chest as she continued, fighting to keep her emotions in check. "I was selfish. I thought I could have everything, that I could have you and still keep everything else," she said, her voice cracking. "But I was wrong. I hurt you and I hurt myself. I don't even know what I was thinking. I just didn't know how to stop." Mark finally stood up, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't look at her, but Jennifer could see the tension in his shoulders. "Jennifer, you didn't just hurt me," he said, his voice tight. "You hurt yourself too. And now you want me to believe that you regret it? That you're sorry for what you did?" She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, I do. I regret everything. Every lie, every moment I spent thinking I could get away with it. I didn't realize how much I was losing until it was too late. You meant so much to me, Mark." For a moment there was silence. Mark didn't speak, but his expression softened just enough for Jennifer to catch a glimpse of the man she had once loved. The man she still loved, even if she didn't deserve to. "I don't know what you want from me, Jennifer," Mark finally said, his voice softer now but tinged with the ache of betrayal. "You've broken my trust. You've broken everything we had. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for that, but I'm not the one who needs to forgive you. You need to forgive yourself." The weight of his words hit her like a wave. She had spent so much time looking for forgiveness from everyone else, but she hadn't even considered that the hardest person to forgive was herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. Mark sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I know, but sometimes saying sorry isn't enough." He turned away then, walking toward the exit of the park without looking back. Jennifer stood there, frozen, as the realization of what had just transpired sank in. This was it. There would be no easy fix, no second chances. She had destroyed everything, and for the first time Jennifer understood that there was nothing she could do to undo the past. The aftermath of her affair wasn't just about losing two men, it was about losing herself. Jennifer's fingers trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white in the early morning light. The road stretched out before her, long and empty, much like the feelings that had been consuming her for days. After Mark's departure, she had thought about nothing but what she had done to him. But there was another person she still had to face, the one she had lied to the most, Thomas. It wasn't the anger that fueled her to seek him out. It wasn't even revenge. It was something deeper, a need for closure, to understand how she could have let herself fall so far into the web of lies and betrayal, and how the man she had hurt most deeply, the one who had trusted her, could have once been her closest ally. Her phone buzzed again, breaking her train of thought. Another message from Mark. She quickly locked the screen, forcing herself to focus. No, this wasn't about him. It was about Thomas. She reached his apartment building, parking a little too far away from the entrance. Her heart hammered in her chest as she glanced at the building. She hadn't seen Thomas in days. He had been avoiding her since the night everything fell apart, and Jennifer knew that confronting him now would open old wounds for both of them. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement as she made her way to the entrance. She wasn't sure what to expect when she saw him again. She wasn't sure if he would even let her in. Jennifer rang the buzzer. A few moments passed before the speaker crackled to life. "Who is it?" "Thomas. It's Jennifer." Silence followed. The weight of the pause was almost unbearable, as though he was trying to decide whether he should let her in or not. Finally, the door clicked open, and she stepped inside. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. Every floor she passed, the knot in her stomach tightened. She wasn't sure what words she could use to make this right. How could she explain the impossible? How could she make him understand? The guilt weighed heavily on her. When the elevator doors opened to the right floor, she walked down the hallway to his door, her steps measured and hesitant. She knocked softly. "Come in." Thomas's voice was cold, distant, the warmth he used to show her now absent, replaced by a quiet resolve. Jennifer pushed the door open and stepped inside. Thomas stood in the middle of the room, his back to her, his eyes cast downward. His posture was rigid, and it was clear that he had been waiting for this moment as much as she had. "Thomas," she began, her voice soft, "we need to talk." He didn't respond, but Jennifer could feel his eyes boring into her. She continued, her words tumbling out in a rush, as though if she didn't speak quickly she might lose the chance to say everything she needed to. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. It will never be enough, but I need you to hear me. I've been a terrible person. I've hurt you. I've lied to you, and I've destroyed the trust we had. But I didn't know how to stop myself. I didn't know how to face the truth. So I ran." Her voice cracked as she spoke, and she could feel the weight of her words pressing down on her chest. For a moment, she thought Thomas wouldn't say anything. He stood there, motionless, as if weighing her apology, or perhaps deciding whether he could ever forgive her. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and bitter. "Do you know how much you've ruined, Jennifer? Do you have any idea what you've done?" Her breath caught in her throat. She had expected anger, but hearing the raw pain in his voice made her stomach churn. "I know," she whispered. "I know. I've ruined everything." Thomas turned to face her, his eyes red-rimmed, his face tight with emotion. He looked like someone who had been betrayed too many times to count, someone who had given everything, only to watch it all slip away. "I trusted you," he said, his voice thick. "I thought we had something real, something that meant something, but you—" He stopped as though unable to finish the sentence. Instead, he closed his eyes and rubbed his temples, trying to push the pain away. Jennifer took a tentative step forward, desperate to reach him, desperate for him to understand. But there was no reaching him now. The walls were too high, the hurt too deep. "Thomas, I was selfish," she said. "I didn't care about you, not really. I cared about what I wanted, about keeping everything in my life perfect, even if it meant lying to you. But now I know that I've lost everything." Thomas didn't answer. His silence was more deafening than any words could have been. "I never wanted to hurt you," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "But I did, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't need your apology." Thomas cut her off, his voice sharper now. "What I need is for you to leave." The words struck her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. There was nothing left to say, nothing she could say to undo the damage. "I've been asking myself if I could forgive you," he said, his voice cold and detached. "But the answer is no. Not now, not ever. You've lost me, Jennifer." She stood there, frozen, as Thomas walked past her and toward the door. His back was turned, and for a moment Jennifer thought she might collapse from the weight of what she had done. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Without another word, Thomas opened the door and looked back at her one last time. His eyes held no warmth, no hope. They were just empty, a reflection of the broken trust and the love that had once been there. "Goodbye, Jennifer." And with that, the door closed behind him. Jennifer sat alone in the dim light of her apartment, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee, though it had long since gone cold. The stillness in the room matched the emptiness she felt inside. It had been a week since she last saw Thomas, and even longer since she had truly faced the consequences of her actions. Her mind was a whirlwind of regrets, guilt, and questions that seemed to have no answers. How could she have done this? How could she have let it all slip away? The weeks that followed her confrontation with Thomas had been excruciating. She had tried to go through the motions of life, to act as if everything was fine, but there was no hiding the truth. She had broken everything she loved, and now she had to find a way to fix herself, to heal from the inside out. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She hesitated, wondering if it was a message from Mark, but she didn't check. Instead, she closed her eyes, letting out a long breath. There was only one thing she could do now: find a way to heal. She had already lost so much, but maybe, just maybe, she could start to rebuild. Jennifer had spent so much time focusing on the lives of others, on the relationships she had betrayed, that she had neglected the most important thing of all: herself. She had lost touch with who she was, and that was something she couldn't ignore any longer. She got up, walking over to the window, staring out at the city below. It was another gray morning, and the world outside seemed to mirror her inner turmoil. But as she looked at the passing cars, the distant skyline, a small flicker of determination began to form within her. It was time to take responsibility, to own up to her mistakes, not just to the people she had hurt, but to herself. She couldn't keep running from the reality of her actions. The guilt would always weigh her down unless she did something to make it right. Not just for Thomas, but for her. Her first step was reaching out to someone who could help. Therapy. It felt like a strange concept at first, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She needed to understand herself again. Why had she made the choices she did? What was driving her to betray those closest to her? She made the call, her hand shaking slightly as she dialed the number. She couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. There was no healing without taking action. The voice on the other end was warm, professional, and calming. "Hello, how can I help you today?" I think I need help," Jennifer said, her voice cracking as the weight of everything hit her all at once. She had been holding it together, but now the tears came, unbidden, as she finally allowed herself to feel the full impact of what she had done. "I need to figure out how to heal," she whispered. There was a pause, and then the therapist's voice responded. "It's okay. We can work through this together. You're not alone in this journey." The comfort in the words didn't erase the pain, but for the first time in a long time, Jennifer felt a small glimmer of hope. She wasn't beyond redemption. She didn't have to remain the person who had betrayed those she loved. She could change. After the call ended, Jennifer sat back down, her hands resting on her lap. She felt exhausted, emotionally drained, but for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of relief. A small step had been taken. A beginning. Later that evening, Jennifer found herself walking to the park. It was a quiet space, a place she used to visit often when she was younger. The air was crisp, and the trees stood tall around her, their branches bare for the winter. She watched as children played in the distance, their laughter rising in the cold air. For a moment, she allowed herself to smile, remembering a time when life was simpler, when she didn't carry the weight of so many mistakes. As she walked, her thoughts drifted back to Thomas. She could still feel the sting of his words, the finality in his voice when he told her he couldn't forgive her. The wound in her heart still throbbed, but she knew now that healing didn't mean she would be able to fix everything right away. It would take time. She had to be patient with herself, and, in time, she would find peace. Her phone buzzed again. This time she checked it. It was Mark. "Can we talk?" the message read. Jennifer's heart skipped a beat. The silence between them had been unbearable. She had wondered if she would ever hear from him again, if he would ever truly understand why she did what she did. But no matter what came next, she knew that she had to take this step toward healing, toward making things right with herself first. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was no longer afraid to face it. She stood up, wiping the tears from her eyes, and took a deep breath. The road ahead would be long, and the path would be full of difficult moments, but it was a path she was willing to walk. For the first time in a long time, Jennifer didn't feel completely broken. She felt like she could begin again. Jennifer stepped out of the coffee shop, the cold air of late autumn biting at her skin as she adjusted her scarf. She hadn't been out much in the past few weeks, save for the occasional therapy session or her walks through the park. But today, something felt different. She was on her way to meet Mark, her ex-husband, the man she had wronged so deeply, and yet still loved in ways she hadn't been able to express. Their relationship had been built on years of memories, trust, and shared life, only to be shattered by her infidelity. Since that fateful day when she had confessed everything, they had avoided one another, both dealing with the aftermath in their own ways. But Mark had reached out to her, suggesting they meet and talk. It was a step toward closure, or perhaps something more. Jennifer wasn't sure, but she knew she couldn't avoid it any longer. As she walked through the busy streets of the city, her heart beat faster with each step. She tried to calm herself, reminding herself that this wasn't just a meeting with someone from her past. It was a chance to face her mistakes and maybe to finally begin the process of healing, for herself and for him. The cafe was small, cozy, with dim lights and soft jazz playing in the background. Jennifer entered and spotted Mark right away, sitting at a corner table. He was looking out the window, his face a mix of concern and curiosity. The moment she walked in, his eyes flicked toward her, and for a brief, heart-stopping second, their gazes locked. Jennifer hesitated, but then she walked toward him, her hands slightly trembling. She took a deep breath before speaking, "Hey." Mark's expression softened, and he stood up slowly. "Jennifer," he said quietly, his voice low but not cold. It wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. It was neutral, as if he was unsure how to approach her, how to approach the woman who had betrayed him so completely. They sat down, and the silence between them hung thick in the air. Jennifer opened her mouth to speak, but found herself unable to form words. The weight of the past few months, the pain they had both endured, sat heavily on her chest. She had thought about this moment countless times, but now that it was here, she realized how inadequate words truly were. Finally, Mark spoke first. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that Jennifer recognized. "I don't know what I expected from this meeting, Jennifer. Maybe some apology, maybe an explanation. I don't know, but here we are." "I'm sorry," Jennifer whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I know that doesn't change anything, but I truly am sorry. For everything. For hurting you, for breaking us." Mark looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and something that resembled forgiveness? She couldn't tell, but what she could see clearly was the exhaustion in his face, the weariness from months of carrying the weight of their failed marriage on his shoulders. "You've said that before," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I need to know. Why? Why did you do it? Why did you throw it all away?" Jennifer swallowed hard, her heart aching at the question. She had asked herself the same thing 1,000 times. How could she have been so careless, so selfish? But now, in the stillness of this moment, she knew the truth. She had acted out of fear of losing herself, of becoming someone she didn't recognize. The affair had been her attempt to escape, to feel something when everything in her life felt out of control. "I don't have an excuse," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I was lost, Mark. I was so lost. And instead of talking to you, instead of facing what was happening, I made a choice that destroyed everything." Mark looked down at his hands, his fingers clenched around his coffee cup. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't as uncomfortable. There was a sort of understanding beginning to form in the air, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, they could both move forward, even if they could never go back. After a long pause, Mark finally met her eyes again. "You're right. We can't go back. But I don't know, Jennifer. I'm not sure where we go from here. I'm not sure if I can ever look at you the same way again." Jennifer felt the sting of his words, but she didn't look away. She didn't want to shy away from the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "And I don't expect you to forgive me, not right away. I need you to know that I'm working on myself. I'm trying to be better, for me, for us, even if that means just letting go and moving on." Mark's eyes softened and he nodded slowly. I think I need to move on too," he said quietly. "I've been holding on to this anger, but I can't live like that anymore. I don't know if we'll ever have a chance to fix what we had, but I think maybe this is the beginning of letting go." Jennifer felt a rush of relief, mixed with sadness. She knew it wasn't a happy ending, but it was a start, a beginning to something new, perhaps a friendship, perhaps just closure. But she could finally see a path forward, and it didn't feel as dark as it once did. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me this chance, to talk, to understand." Mark didn't reply right away. Instead, he simply nodded, and for the first time in months, Jennifer felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't the end of everything, but it was a step towards something better, something that could finally allow both of them to heal. Jennifer sat in the quiet of her apartment, the faint hum of the city outside her window a distant reminder of a world that had moved on while she remained caught in the web of her own emotions. The past few months had been a blur of therapy, self-reflection, and tentative steps toward rebuilding the pieces of her life she had shattered. It hadn't been easy, and at times it had felt like she was moving in circles, not making any real progress. But today, as she looked out the window, something felt different. There was a sense of peace, a calm that had settled over her in a way she hadn't expected. She had faced her past, confronted her mistakes, and done the hardest thing of all, let go. It was a strange feeling. For so long, Jennifer had clung to the idea of what could have been, the life she had imagined with Mark, the family they could have built. But now, that version of her life felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to another person, someone she no longer recognized. It was hard to admit, but she had changed, and she knew deep down that she had to keep changing if she was ever going to truly heal. The meeting with Mark had been a turning point. Their conversation, painful as it was, had allowed her to see things more clearly. He had forgiven her, but there was no going back to what they had. He had made his peace, and now, so had she. Their marriage was over, but that didn't mean their story had to end in bitterness. There was a sense of mutual understanding between them now, an understanding that allowed them both to move on, even if the road ahead was uncertain. Jennifer had spent weeks grappling with the idea of moving on. It felt like an impossible task. How could she let go of something so important, so meaningful? But as time passed, she realized that moving on didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean erasing the love they had shared or pretending the pain didn't exist. Moving on simply meant that she was ready to embrace a future that didn't revolve around her past mistakes. It meant accepting that she had the power to shape her own life, to define who she was becoming, and to heal in her own time. There had been a moment in the days following her conversation with Mark when she had felt a wave of sadness. She missed him in a way that she hadn't allowed herself to before. She missed their life together, the small things they had shared, the way he used to laugh, the way he held her hand when they went on walks, the way they had dreamed together. It hurt, and it still hurt now, but she understood that pain was a part of the healing process. Jennifer stood up from the couch and walked to the small bookshelf in her living room. Her fingers traced the spines of the books she had collected over the years, books about self-improvement, about healing, about love and loss. They had all been there, waiting for her, offering wisdom and comfort. She had read them all, but today she picked up a different book. It wasn't a self-help book or one about healing. It was a novel, a story that had once captivated her, a world she had lost herself in before her life had spiraled out of control. She had forgotten about this book, and yet, as she opened it and began to read, she felt a sense of reconnecting with herself, a person she had neglected for so long. She sank back into the couch, the pages of the novel unfolding in her hands, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jennifer allowed herself to escape into someone else's story. She didn't have to be anyone or do anything. For a while, she was simply a woman reading a book, losing herself in the words. Later that evening, as she prepared dinner for one, she felt the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent. There was no rush, no pressing need to be anywhere or do anything. There was only the present moment, and for the first time in a long while, she felt okay with it. She had spent so much time trying to fix the past, trying to make sense of what had happened and why. But now she understood that she couldn't change it. The mistakes were hers, and she would carry them with her, not as a burden, but as lessons. It was a strange sort of freedom, an acceptance that the past could not define her anymore. As the evening wore on, Jennifer sat in the quiet of her apartment, the glow of the lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. She reflected on everything that had happened, the affair, the heartbreak, the fallout, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding. But now, as she sat there, she knew that the worst was behind her. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be hers to navigate. For the first time in months, Jennifer felt the stirrings of hope. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that whatever it was, she was ready. Moving on wasn't about erasing the past. It was about taking the lessons learned and building something new. And that was what she intended to do. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She was ready to move forward. She was ready to start living again. The sound of Sarah's phone ringing cut through the tense silence of her living room. She looked down at the screen, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the name Ryan flash across it. It had been a few days since their last conversation, since the heart-wrenching choice she'd had to make. She had told him she needed time, but in the back of her mind, she knew this was coming. There was no escaping this moment. "Sarah," Ryan's voice came through, low and hesitant. "Please, we need to talk." She could hear the urgency in his tone. He was scared of losing her for good. But Sarah wasn't sure if she was ready to hear what he had to say. After all, their relationship had been built on lies, deceit, and betrayal. What more could he say that would make her believe him? But then, as if on cue, another thought hit her, something she hadn't considered until now. What if there was someone else? A cold shiver ran down her spine as the words she'd pushed out of her mind crept to the surface. "Ryan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is there something you're not telling me? Is there someone else?" For a long moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line. Then she heard his sharp intake of breath, and she felt it in her chest. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't denying it at all. I didn't want you to find out this way," he said, his voice faltering. "But yes, there's someone else. It started when we were going through our rough patch. I don't know what happened. It was a mistake. It was all a mistake, but it happened." Sarah felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. She had suspected it, yes, but hearing him say it out loud made the truth come crashing down on her like a wave. She had been living in the illusion of hope, thinking that their problems could be fixed, that they could rebuild. But this was a breaking point she couldn't ignore. "Her name is Emily," Ryan continued, each word cutting deeper into Sarah's heart. "We met through work. It was nothing at first, just conversations, lunches, but I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to pull away." Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she tried to absorb the words. She had always trusted Ryan. She had believed in him so fully, so completely, and now, with one sentence, he had shattered that trust beyond repair. She wiped at her eyes, but the tears wouldn't stop. Emily, the other woman, the one who had come into their lives, wormed her way into Ryan's world while Sarah was left in the dark, oblivious to the storm brewing just out of sight. "How long?" Sarah's voice was choked with emotion, her hands trembling as she clutched the phone tighter. 6 months, Ryan replied, his voice almost breaking. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted to do this to you." 6 months. Sarah's world spun. All that time, all those days, all the moments she had thought were normal, happy, and filled with love, they had been lies. Every kiss, every touch, every I love you had been a mask hiding the truth of Ryan's betrayal. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. "I was weak," Ryan said. "I was confused. I thought I was losing you, and I didn't know how to fix it. But what I did, it wasn't the answer. It was a terrible mistake. I should have come to you, talked to you, but instead His voice faltered again. "I ran away." Sarah couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The air felt thick in her lungs as she held the phone to her ear, trying to process everything he was saying, and yet none of it made sense. "How could you love me and then do this?" she asked again, her voice breaking. "I do love you, Sarah," Ryan replied desperately. "I always have. But what I did, I was selfish. I never stopped loving you. I was looking for something to fix the emptiness I felt, and now I see how wrong that was. Please, don't walk away. I want to make things right." Sarah wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the phone across the room to let her anger out, to tell him exactly what she thought of his apologies and his lies. But instead, she just sat there, numb, as the weight of the betrayal crushed her. "I don't know if I can do this, Ryan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can look at you the same way again. How am I supposed to trust you after everything?" There was another long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment Sarah thought he might have hung up, but then she heard his voice again, softer this time. "Please, Sarah, please just give me a chance to fix this. I'll do anything. I'll leave her. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that you're the only one I want. I was stupid and I'm sorry. But I swear I love you. I've always loved you." Sarah closed her eyes, the words echoing in her mind. But how could she ever believe him again? "I can't make any promises right now," Sarah replied, her voice trembling with a mixture of pain and resolve. "I need space. I need time to think about this. Please just give me that." The line went silent for a moment, and then Ryan's voice cracked. "I'll wait, Sarah. I'll wait as long as you need." "Goodbye, Ryan," she said, her voice steady but breaking inside. With that, she ended the call. As the phone screen went dark, Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with the weight of the revelation. Emily, the other woman, the one who had torn their world apart. And yet, even now, she could still feel the lingering pull of the love she once had for Ryan. A love that seemed to hang in the balance, torn between the truth and the lies. The following morning, Sarah felt the weight of everything pressing down on her chest. The night had been restless. Thoughts of Ryan, of Emily, of everything she had just learned, replayed in her mind like a twisted loop. Her mind was a war zone, each thought a battle. Should she forgive him? Should she walk away? Or should she demand the truth she was still missing? She hadn't slept, but she wasn't surprised. She needed to confront him. She needed answers, real ones this time, not the rehearsed lines of an apology. She had let herself live in a haze of half-truths long enough. It was time to confront Ryan face to face, to see if there was anything left of the man she once loved. Her phone buzzed again. Ryan. Her finger hovered over the screen. He'd been calling constantly since their conversation last night. But what more could he possibly say? She had given him space, but it was clear now that he wasn't willing to let go so easily. She wasn't sure if she had the strength to hear another apology. With a deep sigh, she dialed his number, the phone ringing as she leaned back in her chair. When Ryan answered, his voice sounded urgent, almost pleading. "Sarah," he said, his tone shaking, "please, just let me explain. I've been thinking about everything, and I'm so sorry. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need you to understand, I never meant to hurt you." "You never meant to hurt me?" Sarah's voice cracked, her heart beating faster. "You think I'm just going to believe that? After everything? You think I'll just forget? You cheated on me, Ryan. I don't know if I can even look at you the same way anymore." "I know, and I deserve every bit of your anger," he said, his voice breaking. "But I love you, Sarah. I've always loved you. Please, just let me prove it. Let me show you how sorry I am." "Prove it?" Sarah snapped, standing up from her chair. "How can you prove anything after what you've done? You've betrayed me, Ryan. You've destroyed everything I thought we had. Ryan's silence hung in the air, the weight of her words sinking in. It felt like a slap in the face. The quiet was suffocating. He couldn't answer her. He didn't have the words to fix this, to repair the damage he'd done. Sarah, he finally said, his voice so small. Please, I'm asking for one more chance. I know I've messed up, but I swear I'll do anything to make it right. Anything? She echoed bitterly. What could you possibly do? What can you do to make up for 6 months of lies and betrayal? I'll cut ties with her, Ryan said, his voice firming slightly. I'll end things with Emily. I'll prove to you that I am committed to you and only you. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. The words sounded too easy, too rehearsed. She wanted to believe him, truly she did. But how could she? How could she believe in someone who had betrayed her in the worst way possible? She thought of the nights they had spent together, the promises they had made. She thought of the plans for their future, the things they had talked about, the dreams they had shared. And now it was all shattered. How could she possibly go back to him after this? How could she even trust him again? Ryan, she said, her voice soft but resolute. I need more than words. I need to see action. I need to know that you're truly sorry, that you're willing to change. Because right now, all I see is someone who broke my heart, someone who lied to my face and didn't think of the consequences. I will, he said quickly. I will show you. Just give me the chance. Why should I? Sarah asked, a tear slipping down her cheek despite her best efforts to hold it in. Why should I believe you when you've lied to me for so long? There was another long silence, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was filled with the weight of the truth, the crushing realization that no matter how hard Ryan tried, nothing would ever be the same again. I don't know, he said finally, his voice soft. I don't know what I can do to fix it, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying if you'll let me. Just give me the chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve. The words hung in the air, and for a moment Sarah could only hear the sound of her own breathing. She closed her eyes, trying to hold on to her composure, trying to keep herself from breaking down in front of him. But the truth was, she was already broken. He had already torn her apart. She couldn't deny that part of her still loved him. She couldn't deny the small flicker of hope that refused to die, no matter how hard she tried to extinguish it. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the overwhelming pain, the betrayal that clouded every thought she had about him. The thought of him with someone else, someone who wasn't her, twisted her insides. I don't know if I can forgive you, Sarah said, the words coming out in a whisper, but they felt as heavy as a stone. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Ryan's voice trembled as he responded. I understand, but please, just give me time. Time to make things right. Sarah bit her lip, the conflict swirling inside her, threatening to consume her. What was she supposed to do? How could she decide between the man she still loved and the one who had broken her heart? The answer, she realized, wasn't simple. She wasn't going to make a decision in this moment. She needed clarity. She needed space to think. I need to see you, Sarah said finally. In person, we need to talk face to face. I need to hear everything, every detail. And then, I'll figure out what to do. Okay, Ryan agreed immediately, his voice full of relief. Okay, I'll come over. We'll talk. I'll do whatever it takes. As she hung up the phone, Sarah felt a strange mix of anger and relief. The confrontation was coming, and with it, the clarity she had been searching for. But even then, she wasn't sure if it would be enough. The path ahead was uncertain, but at least now she was ready to face it. The days following their confrontation were slow, agonizing. Sarah had asked for time to process, time to think. But with every passing hour, the knot in her stomach only tightened. She had demanded that Ryan meet her face to face, that they have a raw, honest conversation. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear the truth, or if she could handle it. Ryan had promised to come over, and now, as the hours ticked by, Sarah found herself pacing. The old familiar anger still simmered beneath her skin, but it was mingled with doubt, an overwhelming doubt. Could she truly trust him again? Could she forgive him for the deception, the pain, the betrayal? Or was this all just a facade? Another one of his well-practiced apologies, another round of empty promises? She glanced at the clock. It was almost time. Her heart raced as she tried to steady her thoughts. She knew what she needed from him: honesty, accountability. He had to show her he was serious. He had to prove, in ways that words alone couldn't, that he was worthy of another chance. When the doorbell rang, her breath caught in her throat. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. There, standing before her, was Ryan. His face was pale, his eyes tired, as though he hadn't slept in days. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable vulnerability. He looked like a man who knew the depth of his mistakes, but didn't know how to fix them. "Sarah," he said softly, almost as if he was afraid to speak too loudly. "I know I don't deserve this, but I'm here. I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Her heart twisted at the sight of him, but she quickly steeled herself. "Come in," she said, her voice steady. They sat across from each other, the silence between them thick and suffocating. Ryan didn't know where to start. His gaze flickered nervously, avoiding her eyes, and Sarah saw the signs of guilt in his posture, the way his shoulders slumped, the tension in his hands. "I know what I did was unforgivable," Ryan began, his voice shaking. "I betrayed you, and I don't know how to make up for that. But I want to try, Sarah. I want to prove to you that I can be the man you deserve." Sarah's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him. She truly did. But her mind kept circling back to the same question. Could she really rebuild trust after everything? She didn't want to be cynical, didn't want to let her emotions cloud her judgment, but she couldn't help it. The hurt was still raw. "Ryan," she took a deep breath. "How do you expect me to trust you again after everything you've done, after everything I've found out?" He closed his eyes briefly, as if the weight of her words had physically struck him. "I understand. And I don't expect you to just forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness." He paused, his voice quiet but steady. "But I want to try. I want to show you that I can change, that I can make things right." "Change," she repeated. Her heart was pounding, her words coming out sharper than she intended. "How do you change something like this, Ryan? You lied to me for months. You destroyed everything we had. How do you undo that?" "I don't think I can undo it," Ryan said softly, his eyes finally meeting hers. "But I can make sure it never happens again. I'll prove to you through my actions that I'm worthy of your trust, if you're willing to give me that chance." Sarah felt a pang of uncertainty. Part of her so desperately wanted to believe him, to reach across the table and say yes, to let everything go and return to the life they had before. But another part of her, the smarter part, knew that trust wasn't something you could just rebuild overnight. It was fragile, delicate, and it had already been shattered. "Prove it," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "You say you're willing to do anything. Show me. Show me that you understand the depth of what you've done. Show me that you're willing to work for it, not just say the words." Ryan's face was unreadable for a moment, as if he was weighing her request. He nodded slowly, as if accepting that there were no shortcuts in this. "I'll do whatever it takes. No more lies, no more secrets. I'll do everything you need, every step of the way." The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache, but Sarah wasn't sure if sincerity was enough anymore. She had heard it all before, the promises, the apologies, and yet every time they ended in disappointment. She didn't want to let herself fall into that trap again. "I don't know if I can trust you, Ryan," she whispered, her voice wavering. "I don't know if I can believe in us anymore, but I'll try. I'll give you one chance to prove that you're serious about changing." Ryan's eyes widened, a flicker of hope crossing his face. He leaned forward, his hands clenched tightly together. "I'll take that chance, Sarah. I'll take it and I won't waste it, I promise." She looked at him for a long moment, studying his face for any sign of insincerity, but all she saw was raw vulnerability. She had seen this side of him before, but now it felt different. Real. "Okay," Sarah said, swallowing hard. "But this is it. One chance, Ryan, and I'm not sure if I can ever fully forgive you. I don't know if things will ever go back to how they were, but we'll see." Ryan nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. It wasn't a happy resolution, nor was it a promise that everything would be perfect. But it was a step forward, a step toward something new, even if they couldn't yet define what that something was. As they sat there in the quiet, Sarah realized that rebuilding trust wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding a way to move forward, even with the scars, even with the pain. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but it had to start somewhere. For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, it was worth trying. The air was heavy with expectation. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, hands clenched tightly around her coffee mug. It was a quiet morning, the kind where even the smallest noise felt like an intrusion. Ryan sat across from her, the silence between them more palpable than ever. His presence was both comforting and suffocating, a reminder of the weight of everything that had happened and everything that could still be. It had been weeks since they made the decision to try again. Weeks of awkward conversations, hesitant glances, and strained smiles. There had been progress, but not enough to make her forget. Every time she looked at him, her mind replayed the lies, the deception, and the betrayal. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending that everything was okay. "Sarah." Ryan's voice broke the silence, and she felt a shiver run through her. He wasn't looking at her, his eyes focused on the untouched plate in front of him. "I know I messed up. I know you're still angry, still hurt, and I don't blame you for that. But I'm trying, I swear I'm trying. Every day I'm trying." Sarah's heart twisted at the sincerity in his voice, but she could also feel the familiar sting of resentment rising within her. Trying wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the damage. It wasn't enough to make her forget the night she cried alone, wondering if she'd ever find someone who truly cared about her. "Trying?" she repeated softly, her voice tight. "How do you expect me to forgive you, Ryan, after everything? You can't just say you're trying and expect me to forget the past." Her words hung in the air, heavy and bitter. Ryan's shoulders slumped as he looked at her, the weight of her pain sinking in. "I know," he whispered. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I can't keep living with this guilt. I can't keep living with the fear that I've lost you for good." Sarah took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. The truth was, part of her was tired of carrying the weight of his betrayal, tired of constantly questioning whether or not she could trust him again. She wanted to move forward, but it felt impossible when every step forward seemed to be dragged back by the shadows of the past. "I want to forgive you," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She could feel her heart breaking at the thought. "But I don't know if I can." Ryan's eyes flickered with hope, but Sarah could see the pain in them too. He didn't want to hear that. He didn't want to be told that he wasn't enough, that his actions hadn't been enough. He wanted her to believe in him again. He wanted everything to go back to how it had been before. "I'll wait for you," he said softly, almost pleading. "I'll wait however long it takes. I'll do whatever it takes, but I can't fix this by myself. I need you to want to try too." She closed her eyes, a sharp pang of guilt slicing through her. She did want to try. She wanted to believe in him, to forgive him, to move on, but she wasn't sure if she could. There was still so much doubt, so much uncertainty. She could still feel the sting of his betrayal in her bones, in the way she couldn't quite trust him when he reached for her hand or kissed her forehead. It felt like every touch was a reminder of what they had lost, and she wasn't sure if they could ever get it back. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Ryan," she confessed, her voice cracking with emotion. "I don't know if I can keep pretending like everything's fine. I don't know if I can keep living with this fear that you'll hurt me again. I can't keep living like this." Ryan's face fell, the hope in his eyes quickly turning to despair. "Please," he begged, his voice breaking. "I need you, Sarah. I can't lose you. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I swear I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I can be the man you deserve." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, blurring her vision. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to break down in front of him. but she could feel the walls she had spent so long building up around her heart beginning to crumble, brick by brick. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can ever get over this. I don't know if I can trust you again." Ryan's hand reached out, trembling as he gently placed it on top of hers. The warmth of his touch sent a ripple of emotion through her, a reminder of everything they had once shared. But the doubt, the fear, was still there, gnawing at her from the inside. "I'll wait," he repeated, his voice raw. "Whatever it takes, I'll wait." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah knew that this was the moment where she had to choose. She had to choose between forgiveness and separation, between holding on to the man she once loved and letting go of the man who had broken her heart. Her mind raced, torn between her desire to move on and the undeniable pull of their past. She loved him. She knew she did. But love wasn't enough. It couldn't undo the hurt, couldn't erase the lies, couldn't wash away the trust that had been broken. Tears slid down Sarah's cheeks, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand. She wanted to make the right choice, wanted to know what would make her whole again. But in that moment she realized something important. There was no easy answer, no simple solution, no guarantee that everything would be okay. She looked into Ryan's eyes, searching for something, anything to tell her what to do, and for the first time, she saw it. She saw the raw sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability, the depth of his regret. "I'll try," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'll try to forgive you. I'll try to trust you again. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight." Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with relief and gratitude. "I understand," he whispered. "I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes." And for the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to hope. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was willing to try, willing to take that first fragile step toward rebuilding what had been broken. The air was different now, lighter somehow. The weight that had once hung between them seemed to dissipate, leaving only the quiet hum of the world outside. Sarah stood at the kitchen counter, the sunlight filtering through the window, warming the room with a soft glow. It wasn't the first time she'd stood here in this space, but today felt different. Today felt like a new beginning. Ryan had kept his promise. He had been patient, kind, and steadfast. Every day he showed her the man he wanted to be, not just for her, but for himself. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments when Sarah wanted to give up, when the scars of the past felt too deep to heal. But each time she looked at him, each time he held her hand or whispered his love into her ear, she felt the knot of distrust slowly loosening. They had come a long way, but the road ahead wasn't clear. There would still be moments of doubt, times when the past threatened to resurface, but Sarah was ready. She was ready to move forward. Not because she had forgotten everything that had happened, but because she had chosen to let go of the hurt, to make room for something new, something better. She turned to see Ryan standing in the doorway, watching her with a soft smile. His eyes were still filled with that same love, the one that had never fully disappeared despite the betrayal. And as he stepped into the room, taking her hand in his, Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't sure if it was love or hope, or just the simple truth that they had survived together. But whatever it was, it made her feel like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "Morning," Ryan said, his voice steady but tender. "Morning," Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. She could see the hope in his eyes, the quiet expectation, and for once it didn't make her feel trapped. It made her feel safe. "You okay?" he asked, his gaze lingering on her face as if searching for something. Sarah nodded, a small smile curving on her lips. "Yeah, I'm good." Ryan stepped closer, his hands resting on her shoulders, and she looked up at him, letting the softness of the moment wash over her. This was the part where everything felt fragile, where every gesture, every word, carried more weight than it ever had before. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Sarah didn't feel afraid. "I'm proud of us," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "We've come so far." "Yeah," she murmured, her throat tightening. "We have." They had come far, and there was still so much left to discover, about each other, about themselves, and about what it meant to rebuild something that had been broken. But as they stood there, together in the quiet of their home, Sarah realized that rebuilding didn't mean starting over from scratch. It meant starting with the pieces that remained, no matter how cracked or worn, and finding a way to fit them together again. And maybe that was enough. Ryan leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. The gesture was simple, yet it spoke volumes. It was a promise that they would take it one step at a time, that they would continue to face the future, together, no matter what. "I love you," he whispered, his lips brushing against her skin. "I love you too," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. The words felt real now, not just a hollow echo of what once was. They were a declaration, a truth that she had come to accept in her own way, at her own pace. For so long, Sarah had been afraid of what the future held. She had been paralyzed by the fear of repeating the past, of making the same mistakes. But now she understood that the future wasn't something to be feared. It wasn't a series of steps toward inevitable disappointment. It was a blank canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of their new life. A life that they would build together, brick by brick, with love, patience, and trust. "Are you ready?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her heart swelling in her chest. "Yeah, I'm ready." They stood there for a moment, the world outside continuing its steady march, while inside a new chapter began. It wasn't the end of their journey, not by a long shot. There would be challenges, there would be days when they stumbled, but together they would face them, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a sense of peace. The uncertainty had not vanished, but it no longer gripped her in the same way. She was no longer running from her past, but walking forward, hand in hand with Ryan, into a future they would shape together. This was their new beginning, and it was just the start.